So with that, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar where we're going to be talking about Microsoft's Defender for Cloud. And in fact, it's more of a demonstration, taking you through the screens and the interfaces and some of the options that are available within Defender for Cloud. My name's David Guest. I'm a solution architect and technology evangelist with Coach-O, and I'm going to be hosting this. But I'm joined today by Alessandro Foti, who is one of our senior consultants and is a subject matter expert on all things Defender. He's going to be actually going through the demo and taking you through it, and he'll introduce himself when we get to that part. But Defender is part of the security framework that we're talking about, and we all know that security is important. We need to make sure that the assets we have, the data, the systems, and everything else are available to our internal staff and kept away from any attackers. Of course, IT security is complex. We have lots of devices. Long gone are the days when a PC was relatively rare and it would sit on somebody's desk. We now have mobile phones, tablets, Surface devices, laptops, you name it, it exists. Users are coming in from almost everywhere, so the traditional trusted network security is gone. We now almost have an open door policy to the network. I'd like to think it's a bit less than open door. And our assets, data, and other elements of that are increasingly leaving the network. People with bring your own device, people who are working from home have access to the data that they need on a regular basis. Attackers, because of that, are shifting away from a brute force attack against a network or a service and instead going for identity. And 82% of attacks over the past few years have involved compromised credentials of one form or another. Whatever we can do to provide a cleaner and more secure way for people to work has to be worthwhile. And we need to make sure that we're aware of that. And of course, this has all changed over time. We used to have local identities, an identity within the network that people could sign into, local databases that people could sign into. That was extended to make things easier by using enterprise single sign-on, the ability to sign onto your device, and it would let us into other systems without doing anything. Of course, the cloud has changed that. The number of systems that we have connected to networks is huge, whether that be the latest device by Amazon or Google or Apple that will listen to your requests and turn your lights on for you, all the way through to the hybrid identities where we're starting to see verifiable credentials in use. But with all of this, we have to think about the attacks. Our identity approach has had to change from the traditional domains and single directory systems through to using smart card authentications to make things more secure. And today we're looking at Azure Active Directory or other cloud-based IDPs. People implementing zero trust access control, which in Microsoft terms is conditional access. Passwordless authentication, the use of the Authenticator app to allow you in, whether that's directly through a number match, through a one-time password, or even FIDO keys. All of this is helping to keep us secure, but we need to remember that we have drive-bys. We have the ability to pick up malware from websites that are uncontrolled, from devices and emails that haven't been as well managed as we'd like. And we need to make sure that we're aware of all of this. The physical network security perimeter, we know no longer exists. People need to work from wherever they are. The network perimeter, the use of VPNs, is really being looked at closely now. Do we need to be on a network in order to access something, or is it possible that we can get to it using our identity and using the cloud services, things like the Azure application proxy? Yes, there are still things that must be done on a network, privileged access workstations, specific data sets, and so on. Defender for Cloud is going to enable us to see a lot more of the information about this as we go forwards. But obviously we can talk about it a lot, but it's more important for you to see a real interaction with the system, to understand what's going on, to get a grip for that interface, that single pane of glass. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Alessandro, who will introduce himself and then take you through that pane of glass.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dave. I am Alessandro Foti. I'm a senior consultant here with Cocho, and I specialize in everything Defender. Namely, today we've got Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, in short MDE, Microsoft Defender for Identity, in short MDI, Microsoft Defender for Office 365, in short MDO, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, in not so short MDCA, and Microsoft Defender for Cloud, or in short MDC, which is what we're covering today. So if we think of the Defender platform, we're thinking originally of the Defender AV, the one that's been with us for quite some years now. But now with the newer security solutions, we're thinking of targeted solutions for a specific resource. So in the case of, for example, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, we're thinking of our endpoints, our machines, our devices, the physical stuff. In the case of Microsoft Defender for Office 365, we're thinking of our Office 365 resources, so your mail, your Teams messages, and so on and so forth for all the other solutions. When we're thinking of Microsoft Defender for Cloud, though, we're not looking at an individual specialized area. We're taking a step back and trying to get more of a holistic view of what's going on in the entirety of your environment, not limited to what, for example, your Azure environment could be, but what your Azure, multiple of them could be, what your AWS environment could be, what your Google Cloud could be, and some of your hybrid resources. So we're taking a step back and try to assess, why have I got here, what's going on? Effectively, Microsoft Defender for Cloud is Microsoft Cloud Security Posture Management Solution, or CSPM, and Microsoft Cloud Workload Protection Platform, or CWP, in one portal. And despite what the name kind of betrays the purpose of the product, because despite saying Microsoft Defender for Cloud, it does have some very powerful on-premise capability. We'll deep dive a bit more into that later so you can see what it can do, but you can integrate your on-premise servers regardless of their OS family. So one could think it's a Microsoft product. Okay, I can onboard Microsoft Defender for servers. Yet that's very true, but you can onboard your Linux machines, and then we'll have an almost feature parity of features and analysis tools. So again, the idea is, let's try to see what's going on. And if we were to break down Microsoft Defender for Cloud, or MDC from now onwards, in 4 key features, we'd probably say its point is to assess and strengthen, to manage compliance, and we can see a little button from that here, and we'll have a look together later on, to enable threat protection, again, we can have a look here, and to detect vulnerabilities, and we can have a look at that here in the security posture. To do these things, to do these 4 key things that MDC offers, you can take a 3 steps approach really, which is, I would say, the way Defender for Cloud has been designed to operate. If anyone is familiar with what used to be Azure Security Center, this is the facelifting and expanding of the Azure Security Center to do a lot more, but with the same principles. So effectively, you are connecting your environment, meaning your Azure environments, your AWS environments, your G-Cloud environments, and your on-premise environments, and it will be done through here, and we'll have a look in a second. You will evaluate, as part of step 2, your status. So effectively, what's your security posture? What's going on? What is it that we need to do? And then finally, step 3, you'll be taking action. So you look at the recommendations and decide what the remediations for these actions are. Microsoft has broken down these 4 key features and 3 steps in what are effectively 3 major panes, if you want, in the dashboard, which are the General tab, which is where you find your alerts, your inventory, your dashboards, and so on and so forth. Your Cloud Security pane, where really you got the core features of CSPM and CWP. That's where that part lies in the portal. And then you got your management, which is where you do your configuration, your add-ons, your automated responses, and so on and so forth. Microsoft has decided not to take a stance of calling that, for example, CSPM panel or CWP panel. It's kind of all blended in, but when you actually go through the portal, it flows quite nicely, and it's quite logical in the way it operates. We'll have a look at that in a moment. And why? We know what this can do, but why would we want to implement something from Microsoft Defender for Cloud? Because one could say, oh, but we got tool X that does this part, or we got tool Y that does this part, or tool Z that does this part. And that is true. There are tools out there that do some of the things that this does, but this gives you a one-stop shop where you can do it all, and you can have an assessment for everything. And that assessment for everything, really, yet again, I like breaking down things in steps for the sake of clarity, can be broken down in 3 steps mainly, which is, what are your cloud security requirements? And you will always have a current situation, which is what we get here. You will get an immediate need that's born of your current situation. So, okay, there are some things I didn't know about I need to do now. And then there's a desired state. Okay, I've put the fire off. I now know where I'm standing. Where do I want to be in the future? And this is done through various components, which are your security posture, your regulatory compliance, and workload protection that goes with it, your firewall manager, and despite this being in preview, it's already operational, your DevOps security, which we'll touch for all of these later on. Some of them are phenomenal, to be fair. They do some things that look like black magic. One thing to keep in mind as we drive through this portal is that Microsoft Defender for Cloud, like all Microsoft security products, is designed with the shared responsibility model in mind. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud gives you the visibility and gives you the tools and the means to remediate and take actions on whatever might be discovered here, but ultimately is up to you to make that happen. It's up to you to fix it. Microsoft will not go and take the initiative of blocking ports for you or potentially destroying your productivity by doing so. You got the means, you got the tools, you got the know-how, you got the notifications. These are all provided to you by Microsoft. It's up to you to make it happen. And we'll make it happen now. We'll have a look at how you can do that. So first thing first, we'll actually start from the bottom and we'll have a look at environment settings. So here, we'll have a look at effectively, okay, we talked about Azure, we talked about AWS and G-Cloud, but how do we get there? How do we actually implement that? Now, this is a demo environment. So first and foremost, if something doesn't work, I apologize, but it's live. We're currently browsing on this. So if something stops working, let's blame Azure, not the presenter. But at the moment, we got 2 Azure subscriptions in this environment and none of the others. That's because obviously the others don't really provide an AWS demo account to show off Microsoft Defender for Cloud. But we can still show you the process of that works. So from this tab, we'll add effectively the environment we need. And those environments are to be found here. So you got AWS, G-Cloud, GitHub, which is in preview, and Azure DevOps, which are in preview. These are likely to be merged eventually in the future. And I cannot physically do this right now, but I'll show you what that looks like because it's actually quite simple. So say we want to add our AWS environment. What you'd be choosing is obviously your name and your type of onboarding. And what you have to do is provide your AWS account ID. Once you do that, again, I cannot show you now as is the demo environment, but what it will generate for you, Defender for Cloud will generate a file containing all the necessary orders for accounts, connectors, effectively all the components that AWS and Defender for Cloud require to communicate efficiently with each other. It then takes you to a link, you open it on the other side, you feed that document, you feed that file that the Defender for Cloud generated for you, and then it integrates. After about 10 minutes, it will be integrated and you will start seeing data coming through. Now, it will be integrated within 10 minutes, but really before all the data comes in and flows, depending on the size of your environment, it could take 24 hours. That applies to AWS, G Cloud, DevOps, and so on and so forth. As we mentioned before, though, it's not just cloud, it's on-prem as well. So if we have a look at the security solutions here, we can, for example, Microsoft acknowledges that you're not necessarily using everything cloud-based and you're not necessarily using everything Microsoft-based. So say you got a CM from a third-party vendor and a vendor that's still on-premise, you can integrate that. And there are various native connectors or some others that you can customize yourself to bring it in. And then you can bring in non-Azure servers. These non-Azure servers are brought in via Azure Arc, which is effectively an agent that will make so that a non-native Azure resource becomes then, in terms of management, a native Azure resource. So at that point, you can manage it as if it were a native Azure resource. And despite what it says here, it says Microsoft, this is not just for your Windows servers, this is for Linux and Unix boxes as well. We tested it extensively. It will work with your Red Hat boxes, it will work with your Ubuntu boxes, it will work with every major and updated operating system in the Linux world you can think of. And it will have enormous feature parity for everything, meaning it will then onboard you to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint for servers automatically. That's a mouthful of a name. And you can then activate the same plans that you would have on your standard Windows servers. So with this is where you can automate your components. Sorry, you can integrate your components. You brought them in. What do you want to do with them now? So if we take a step back to the overview, this is your typical, I would say, Microsoft dashboard. We're probably familiar with those now. If anyone has used MDE or MDI or MDO or MDCA, you're probably familiar with the way Microsoft does security dashboards these days. The idea is, let's have a quick look, a quick glance on what is it that's going on in our environment and what is it that we can do. So here, for example, you've got a quick analysis of your security posture, broken down by your cloud environment, a quick glance of your regulatory compliance, and if there's anyone from the compliance teams later, they will love this part. Usually people love this part. What your inventory is, and so on and so forth. And on the right-hand side, quite some quick tips of things that Defender thinks, okay, just so you know, you can now do this, for example, for Linux, or this is about to happen, just keeping you in the know effectively. But let's try to start taking some actions and look at, okay, we got this data now, let's see what we can do. So we'll go on to recommendations. And if we go into recommendations, we'll see this dashboard here. So this dashboard will tackle recommendations on every environment that you connect, and you can filter out here. So at this moment, I got Azure, AWS, and GCP both all on. Obviously, as I said before, you cannot see AWS and GCP at the moment because we haven't got them in the demo environment, but if you had, you see the exact same view. And here we got the Secure Score. The Secure Score, if you're not familiar with it, it's Microsoft's way of trying to simplify and I would say almost gamify your security posture. So rather than being an extensive list of things you're doing right or things you're doing wrong, it's a percentage and it's a score at the same time. So being a score, it can tell you, how can we make this score better? How can we win the game, the security game? And obviously, as you improve your situation, your secure score goes up. So if we look down here, we got some recommendations. And these recommendations are sorted by what I like to call your best bang for your buck, really. So they're in order of what would increase the most your secure score if you were to take action right now. So if we look here at the top, we got enable MFA. and this got a potential score increase of 17%. So this is an action that could definitely do with doing right away. And then we got others beneath. If we expand on that one, now we can look at the way it's actually broken down. So we can see that it's telling you what resources are unhealthy. In this case, we've got one subscription in that's actually active, and it's telling you this is applying to one subscription out of one. And what exactly is it applying to? So it's saying that MFA should be enabled on all accounts with owner permissions on subscriptions. And then same thing for all accounts with write permissions on subscriptions. So if we click it on the first one, there we go. So here it gives you this kind of panel, which is it's going to be common to everything we see on Defender for Cloud. This is the way Defender for Cloud presents remediation, inventorizing, and so on and so forth. So first thing first, you got an exempt button up here. So say for whatever reason, this is an action you cannot take, you can exempt this action, which means you will remove that from the recommendation. You will stop Microsoft from, quote unquote, pestering you daily with this thing. It is to be noted, this doesn't mean that you've now increased your security posture. It doesn't mean you're now in a better place. Microsoft will keep your secure score as it is. Microsoft will still acknowledge that you need to do this. You're simply stopping the continuous alert. It is to be kept in mind, as I said, this will not make you more secure. It's an exception in case for whatever reason you cannot take this action. But do not think you can just go and exempt everything and all of a sudden, yeah, we got 100% secure score, we're as good as we can be. That won't be the case. Microsoft will keep you on your toes. If we look here, we got the affected resources. In this case, we know it's something in this subscription. And if we click on this, we can see that we can do a couple of things with that actually. We can assign an owner, so we can say, this is now the responsibility of person X or team X, and exempt it again. But before we go on this part, I'd like to click on this and show you. So if you actually click on the action, now this is not something I can do right now because I haven't got conditional access right for this account, as it's a demo account, but this is now listed to me and to us all the accounts that currently don't have MFA. And if we add access to your conditional access policies, we could actually use now this portal to click continue and crack on and then start to remediate in the situation. So in one step, in one place is your visibility. This is what you need to fix. But Microsoft took an extra step, which is, okay, this happened once, it happens twice, it happened 3 times. You never know when it's going to happen again because you might be adding another subscription, you might be adding another cloud environment. It's difficult to keep track of everything. So what you can do, and it's integrated here, is trigger a logic app. So you can write logic apps that are designed to automate something that you're already able to deal with. So for example, here, I won't have any now at the moment because there's a demo environment again. But say you had a logic app to enable MFA, you would have a logic app here to enable MFA. It would pass the variable through here, so we'll take the variable of the user list of the Graph API. In the background is always the Graph API for anything Microsoft Defender. If you're not familiar with it, we strongly recommend you read the documentation. It's an extremely powerful tool. You pass to the variable, you click trigger, and all of a sudden, without any further step, you remediated your issue. This can be scripted and put together with everything else. And if you're familiar with logic apps, you will know that you can put them together with Logic App Designer. You don't have to necessarily code. You can put that together in a graphical view in a series of if, else, while, put the trigger, put the action, and effectively then trigger them to do whatever it is that you need to achieve. And this can be done for absolutely everything. But Microsoft took an extra step. You can actually automate the automation, if it makes sense. And you can do that from here. So you got your workflow automation. So now, say you got your recommendation, like the one we just saw for the MFA, and say you want to, you know this happened a few times, you now want to automate the automation. You don't want to do that manually. What you can do is create a workflow automation from MDC. This usually takes a couple of seconds to load. I hope it works. There we go. You create a name, and what you do is, for example, choose your resource, and we can say, what's the trigger? And we say, you know what, the trigger is a recommendation. Here you'll have all the recommendations that you can see. The list is extensive. But say, for example, just for the sake of one thing, endpoint protection should be installed on all machines. We choose that one, and we choose as a recommendation state, we choose unhealthy. So now we're saying that when the trigger is a recommendation, the recommendation is endpoint protection should be installed on machines, and the recommendation state, meaning those machines don't have the endpoint protection because they're unhealthy, then do this. And what you can do, you can then select, I haven't got logic apps here as I said, but you can select whatever logic app you might have created, tag it here, and as soon as this happens, before you read the recommendation, before you decide to take action, this will trigger and work for you. That's why I said you can automate the automation. You can create a process for which once you're familiar with something that's happening in your environment, you can make so you never have to deal with it again and just supervise it. It's a remarkably powerful tool. From here, we can go on to the next step, which are the security alerts. Security alerts are exactly what they say on the, what it says on the tin, is your security alerts, again, not just for an individual set of resources. Here you might see this one for clearly a VM. This is what we got in demo environment, but really it's a lot broader than that. It's your VM, is your storage accounts, is your logic apps, it's your subscriptions, your everything. And I'll show you that more later in the inventory. So if we click on the alert here and we open the full details, we can see a description of the alert. We can see the affected resources. We can see where that sits on the MITRE ATT&CK kill chain. So we can see, for example, this one is in the initial access step. So it's fairly advanced, really. Okay, so we want to do something with it. Now we know it's there. What we don't want to do something with is alert. We can look at take action. And again, by the philosophy we point out again, the steps for cloud security are current state, immediate needs, and desired state. So here you got to mitigate the threat. So suggestions on how to mitigate this threat right now. Obviously, we want not to deal with this again. We want to make sure this doesn't happen again. So you've got your prevent future attacks. And here, this is effectively, if you're familiar with MDE's attack surface reduction rules, this is kind of a holistic attack surface reduction rule kind of product. It's telling you the actions that you can take so that these is mitigated and doesn't happen again. So it's telling you, for example, you got these top 3 security recommendations, which if you were to enforce would drastically reduce the chance of this happening again. And by the same logic we pointed out before, you got your trigger automated response. You can trigger a logic app for any of your security alerts. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel really, because say you haven't written one before, or you haven't got the time to write one, Micro's got an open source community GitHub repo. On this repo, both Microsoft and contributors alike keep populating this with pre-made logic apps, security-focused Microsoft Defender for cloud logic apps to do things. So if we click, for example, on this one and configure MD, that actually happens to be quite handy. Automatically onboard Server 2019 and Linux from Azure Security Center. You can have the logic apps here pre-created. You can deploy it to Azure, or you can use it as is, or you can modify it and fine-tune to do exactly what it is that you want to do. No need to reinvent the wheel. Most of Microsoft ones are documented, so they explain you step by step. It's frankly great. This is a community that's actually quite thriving, and you'll find plenty of things updated fairly often. Likewise, exactly for the recommendation, you can suppress similar alerts or configure a notification setting. So if we now have a look at the inventory, you can have a look here. And as we said before, this is where you get more an idea of what's going on in your environment. So we're not talking just VMs, we're not talking just machines, we're talking everything. So you can see we've got virtual machines, we've got subscriptions, we've got storage accounts, we've got key vaults, web apps, logic apps. All of that can be monitored, regardless of that being Azure, AWS, and G Cloud. You can find inventorized here. And within here, you can see the various recommendations for every single action and for every single resource, rather. I will not click on these ones now for the sake of time, and frankly, this is not the best tab to take remediation. This is more kind of have a look at your inventory and see what's there that can be done. Obviously, you can export this, and you can write queries to narrow this down. They are queries, KQL queries. They query the Graph API, and that's actually a decent segue If you're not too familiar with that and you're not too familiar with KQL, Microsoft now introduced a Cloud Security Explorer preview tool, which effectively is the logic app designer of KQL queries. You can write in a graphical way a query to go and retrieve the information you need. You've got templates for that, and then you can get your results customized as to what you want. Likewise, you've got pre-made workbooks. These workbooks are effectively dashboards, so Microsoft dashboards of customized dashboards that are pre-made, or you can make yourself to go and query more information. So for example, we got here one for onboarding Defender for Cloud. You can look at what Defender plans have been onboarded for your service, app services, database, storage, containers, etc., etc., etc. Same for the log analytics workspaces. You can create your own, you can use the one that are shared. Now, if we have a look a bit more into detail within the security posture and cloud security phase, again, we won't spend too much on this as most of the actions are better looked at from the recommendations tab. But here you can have an idea of how your secure score is built, the environments that are getting monitored, the recommendation are there, the unhealthy resources. Again, it's the same information spread across different tabs. What we got though here is the regulatory compliance one, and this is extremely powerful. So obviously, Microsoft got its own benchmark, which is the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. But there are plenty of regulatory compliance frameworks these days. You know, you got your ISO, you got your HIPAA, you got your SOC, you got 1,000,001 of those. And it's difficult to keep track of all of those, but it's a fundamental part of every company's security strategy to try to comply with those. For a time is a legal requirement. So apart from the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, you can actually add your own regulatory compliance policies and follow them and target them. So for example, here we got the Microsoft one, but then we got ISO 27001. If we click on this, it will have a breakdown of all the of all the ISO 27001 compliance controls, exactly as you know them, and it will tell you which ones are healthy and which ones are not so much. So if we look at this one, the A6, there's an A6 one that's not healthy, and then A612, segregation of duties, is not healthy. So we expand on that, and we can see at a glance that a maximum of 3 owners should be designated for subscriptions. That's something that is not complying here. So we click on it. Again, same tab as before. We click again here, and let's see what's what. And we can see that we've got all these users that are currently owners. This is breaking that compliance regulation. It needs to be fixed. And again, if you got admin rights to do so, you can go here and fix it. And this can be done for anything. You can add more of these. You can add, for example, ones that are custom to or bespoke to countries. There's the one for the NHS, for example. There's the one for the UK Security Agency. There's everything you can think of. You can usually add it from here, but I haven't got rights to do that being a demo account, but you can do that from, just to show you how it looks like. If we deep dive here, and I go into security policy, there we go, here's the button. Industry and regulatory standards. If you click on add more standards, you see these have been manually added. You can find all the standards you want, add them, track them, remediate them. It's usually off by compliance. Workload protections, yet again, another dashboard similar to the secure score to try to keep track of what is it that you might not be protecting. So here, for example, we're having a look, we got 93% of our environment that's covered, but 6% isn't. And so we can go here and remediate and have a look. Firewall manager, this is where you keep track of your network security. So you can have a look at your virtual network fireworks, your application gateway, everything here. You can create policies, centralize and deploy to the various subscriptions on a higher level to regulate your network security. And then this brand new one, still in preview, DevOps security. DevOps security is, I know it's a preview, but it's phenomenal. What you can do really, and it's a pity I cannot show you right now, you can connect your DevOps environment, so your Azure DevOps or your GitHub. You can configure your pipelines here. And once that's all done, you'll have a dashboard similar to the ones we saw in the workbooks, where your code, the code in DevOps, your pipelines and everything else, and the code within it, it's analyzed continuously. And Microsoft will point out, this pipeline's got this potential exploit. This code has got this vulnerability coded in. This is how you can remediate it. And if any of you is familiar with GitHub Copilot. It's effectively GitHub Copilot, which is an assistant, an AI assistant to help you improve your code as you're coding within Visual Studio Code. This is the same thing, but security focused. So we'll analyze everything in your code, everything in your pipeline to tell you actually the way you wrote this code, this is unsecure. It can be exploited in way X, Y, and Z. Fix it this way, fix it that way. This is how you remediate your code. Extremely powerful tool. This that just, despite being a preview, enhances even more Microsoft Defender for Cloud. And yeah, with that, we covered briefly, I acknowledge what Defender for Cloud is, what it can do for you, and hopefully spark an interest to ask more questions and to integrate this new weapon in your arsenal to fight cybersecurity threats. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. I'm a little confused as to which screen people are now seeing because there's too much going on. We've had a few questions which I'll get to in a second, but just to finish off, just to make sure we're all aware, Defender for Cloud is quite a wide-ranging system. It gives us a security posture summary of where we are. Yes, it has a Microsoft view on that, but it is, after all, a Microsoft tool. It will generally look at the management that you've got in place and how that's all working. It will quite happily look at the cloud security aspects, and it does cover some regulatory compliance, which is where some of the information is coming from. PCI is included, ISO 27001, specifically 2013, but things are going to move. And it's not just about the Microsoft Cloud, it also talks to AWS and GCP and to on-premises services. Now, I've done my best to answer some of the questions that are in the chat, but in the last few minutes, I think there's probably a few things that we can go over. First of all, Alessandro, what happened to Defender for Servers?
That's a very good question. You've got a few things happen to Defender for Servers. So Defender for Servers, if you're familiar, was a component, an add-on component of your E5 subscription for MDE, for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So previously, you would effectively create a policy to onboard your servers to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, very similar to the way you would do that with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint endpoints, or rather user endpoints. This is now slightly changed in the sense that Microsoft improved the process of doing that and it added a tiny bit of a complication in the way for the licensing bit. But what happened effectively now, any server can actually be onboarded automatically without having to write a GPO, without having to write a SCCM policy, without having to write, if you got that configured, an Intune onboarding policy through Defender for Cloud. So effectively, if you got the Defender for Servers plan enabled, any resource that's captured by Defender for Cloud, any server that's captured from Defender for Cloud, whether that's cloud native or on-premise brought onto the cloud by Azure Arc, would be automatically onboarded for you, regardless of that being a Microsoft tool or a Linux Unix operating system. So that part is taken care of. You can almost forget about it. And in a way, it became a little bit more convenient in the sense that whilst before it was a license you were paying for end off, now it's based on a consumption model. So effectively, if your servers that are onboarded are up and running, you're paying for the time they're up and running and the monitoring they're getting. If they're off, you're not paying for them anymore. Does that answer the question?
Well, I hope so. It's definitely one of the options that's available underneath the Microsoft Defender for Cloud pricing model. Another one of the questions that came through was which license covers DevOps, and I think from memory, but Alessandro, please correct me if I get this wrong, the option for DevOps is just one of the selectable options underneath Defender for Cloud.
Yes, so the way it works is when you are licensed for Defender for Cloud, it's a pity I cannot show you right now, you've got a set of security plans, as Microsoft calls them. They're effectively toggles where you go there and you go servers on, storage on, DevOps on, or off, whatever that is. And next to it, actually quite conveniently compared to usual Microsoft ways, it tells you how much it costs. So it tells you, for example, this is, I don't know, $2 per resource per month, or 50p per whatever that might be. So yeah, you toggle that on that way. And then, as I said, it's a consumption-based model for most MDC things. So you toggle whatever is it that you need, and then you get billed for it. Defender and cloud, sorry, DevOps, Azure DevOps is one of those features that you can enable in this way.
So in effect, it's not necessarily licensable, but it's an option within Defender for Cloud that you can enable should you need to.
Yes, whether there is an extra requirement in terms of an overarching licensing thing, I'll say pass on that because I'm not a licensing expert and I do not claim to be or try to be one. So I wouldn't know about that. But in terms of the option and the additional licensing within MDC, that's correct. You can just toggle it on or off.
Great. Now, you were talking about regulatory compliance.
Yes.
Can you add your own? So if you're not one of the people who've got, let's say, NHS or ISO, but you've got something else, can you create your own framework?
The answer is yes. You can add whatever framework you want, and the list is remarkably extensive. As I was browsing through the list the first time I saw that, I saw plenty of regulatory compliance frameworks that I actually never saw in my life before from countries I barely knew existed. So there is an extensive list, but if your requirements are very bespoke, you can create your own frameworks with your own requirements and apply it as if it was a native regulatory compliance framework. That's correct. And it will act exactly like a native one. Recommendations, analysis, how to remediate, go and do this, do that to fix it.
Okay, thank you. In which case, I think we're pretty much getting towards the end. So if any of this has been interesting to you, please do give us a call, get in contact with your support team, and we'll happily go through some more detail on this in a call and work out how we can help you to actually deploy Defender for Cloud in a live environment. As I say, we've handled the questions. So with that, all I'm going to say is thank you very much for your attention for the last 45 minutes, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.